Sweet. How's everyone doing? Can I get some cheers? Can I get some, we're doing great. Wow. Woo! Awesome, awesome. So, Marta, it is lovely to have you. This has been such an exciting event to see so many colleagues and partners from across the Blockchain Law Center community, the Filecoin community, but we also have some folks who are new to blockchain. They're new to technology. They're new to us. So would love to kick us off with just a snapshot of who you are, what's FFDW, and your journey into blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a civil liberties and technology attorney by training. Because of my work in civil liberties, I was very interested in cryptocurrency back in 2015 when I was a practicing lawyer. I was really interested in it because I really saw cryptocurrency as something that could bring the censorship resistance and privacy and anonymity and other civil liberties protections of cash into the online world. So that was sort of initially what got me interested in cryptocurrency. I was at a law firm with some of the people who are actually in the audience here back then, and began representing some of the early companies in the space. At the time, it was Bitcoin, not cryptocurrency. Right. Technically, Dogecoin was also around, but didn't represent them. Got
any Dogecoin?
Yeah, this is like one of the only sort of blockchain gatherings where no one has Dogecoin, right? This is like we're like not those blockchain people, right?
Yeah.
Which is great. And so that's sort of how that was sort of my entree into the blockchain world. One of the projects that I was really lucky to start working with was the early team that was building Filecoin. Filecoin is a decentralized file storage network, which really also brings those civil liberties protections into file storage. And I was very lucky to be the person who was put in charge of going and launching the governance body for the Filecoin network, which is Filecoin Foundation. And at the same time, we also launched Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web, FFDW, which we all know and love, which is a sort of the charitable sister organization of Filecoin Foundation. And the idea behind Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web was that really what we are doing in the Filecoin universe is about so much more than Filecoin. It's not about one particular cryptocurrency or one particular project. We really see ourselves as a foundational technology for the entire decentralized web space in the same way that IPFS, which the same sort of group of people had worked on before, is really a foundational technology. And so for us, it was really important that as we were launching the Filecoin Foundation, that we not only sort of focused on Filecoin, but that we also much more broadly focused on the big picture of what this technology, decentralized web technologies, can do for the next generation of the internet. And that is why we created Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web, I guess 4 years ago, which is amazing.
So low-key, she's a big deal. So you mentioned IPFS. Can you unpack that a little bit more, especially for folks that aren't attuned to what that is and why it's so important?
Absolutely. So IPFS stands for the Interplanetary File System. It was created back in 2014 by Juan, who also is the original creator of Filecoin. IPFS is a decentralized file storage network. And the way that I like to explain it for people who are not familiar is that when it comes to today's web, I kind of analogize it to on today's web, when you go to a particular web page, you're actually looking for data in a particular server in a particular place. Like that's what's happening. There's a data somewhere in the world physically that is coming to you on today's web. And with IPFS, instead of looking for data in a particular place, you actually look for data based on what it is. And the analogy I use is, imagine that you just read a really good book and you tell your friend about the good book. But instead of telling them the name of the book, you tell them it's in the New York Public Library on the 3rd floor, 2nd shelf over, 2 books to the left, right? It really is kind of crazy to do it that way, right? Because your friend is gonna have to fly to that particular location, go to that location, and once they're there, maybe that book isn't there anymore. Maybe someone tore out a page. maybe you had the book in your backpack, or maybe there were literally 1,000 other more convenient ways and places you could have gotten that book, right? And so really the way that today's internet works is that example of the New York Public Library. You're going to a particular server in a particular place to retrieve information. And what IPFS does is you actually are able to look for data based on what it is. So it's much more like telling your friend, oh, the name of the good book I read was Gone with the Wind, right? And letting your friend really get that book from wherever is the most convenient for them. So maybe they already have it, maybe their local library. Similarly with IPFS, any piece of data, it has a hash, which is a content ID. So basically, a particular piece of data will have an alphanumeric string associated with it, which if you change even one small piece of that particular piece of content, actually means that the entire content ID will be different. So when you go to look for data, you look for a particular content ID, and it'll pull it from wherever's closest. And you also, at the same time, know that that data is authentically the data that you are looking for, because if it were tampered with, it would have a different content ID. So that's the idea behind IPFS. And Filecoin really built the incentive layer on top of IPFS a few years later.
Yeah, right. So going back then, I want to go back to the mission, right? So a lot about the mission is about decentralizing information, decentralizing storage, access to knowledge, right? I want to know, what is your perspective on our current centralized system that is the internet? And how does FFDW's impact areas really address that in a big way? And I want you to also touch upon some of the, the projects in this room that are also helping you to achieve that mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so for us, I think when you really think about today's internet, we sort of live our lives through just a handful of corporations, right? Like when you think, all of us are sitting here in this room, right? And at this very moment, we are beaming out information to a couple of giant companies, right? All of us, regardless of whether you're actually actively on your phone or not.
This crowd is not on their phone.
Regardless, there's all this information that's being transmitted to just a few companies. And if you imagine your life, for example, without Google, right? Suddenly you have absolutely no access to Google. Totally different existence than you have now, right? We all are really living our lives through just a couple of corporations. The problem with that is that that really means you have no choice but to trust those corporations, right? You have no choice but to trust them with your data. You have no choice but to trust that when they get government requests for that data, that they will protect your civil liberties. You have no choice but to trust that they're not doing anything nefarious with your data or anything that you don't want to know. Wouldn't want them to do. And that data is really incredibly sensitive, right? That data is what you're looking at, who you're talking to, what you believe, right? What you're exploring, really your innermost thoughts. And so for me, it's really important. The reason that we really are doing what we're doing is that we want to put users back in control of their data. We want to be able to protect user privacy and security and really create a world where we don't have to live our life through just a couple of corporations. And so that's sort of the idea behind what we're doing. At the same time, there's all sorts of things, all sorts of applications of these technologies that go so far beyond just what we would think of as cryptocurrency technologies. One of the things we're talking about, for example, I was talking about authentication, right? Being able to actually cryptographically prove that a photograph or a video actually has not been tampered with. And that's something that's actually incredibly powerful, particularly in the human rights context, right? So we have phenomenal partners like the Guardian Project, like Witness, like the Starling Labs. I know I love seeing the jazz hands in the room here. But people who are really using the ability to the ability of these decentralized technologies to authenticate data in a way that really bolsters human rights. One example is the Starling Lab recently submitted to the International Criminal Court records of war crimes in Ukraine, which were cryptographically verified using these technologies. Again, really powerful to be able to prove that this data has not been tampered with. And that's just one example. Obviously, we have a whole room. This is like the highest signal to noise ratio of any room I've ever seen. This is like actually amazing, like seeing you all. But we have so many people in this room who are working on really important use cases for this technology that really shows how it can empower human rights.
Absolutely, and I do want to touch on those use cases. But you mentioned big tech, So what do you see as AI in that respect? Do you see AI as sort of following that same trajectory? Do you see something else? Like, what is your overall perspective and notion on artificial intelligence as we're seeing it evolve right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I should say I am actually like an AI optimist. And I really do think there's all sorts of amazing things that AI is going to enable, right? Things like drug discovery, like just as one example. And there are all sorts of things where we can really, if we harness this technology for good, there's so many amazing things that we can do to really push humanity forward using this technology. When it comes to AI and sort of how Filecoin Foundation and FFDW are thinking about AI, we're really thinking about it in a couple of ways. The first is Filecoin is a really fantastic sort of technology stack to use for storing AI data sets and also for authenticating. We've talked about authentication a couple times, for authenticating that particular data sets are the provenance of particular data sets, right? So those are two ways in which this technology is really important. But another that I'm also very excited about is there are projects building on top of Filecoin that are really focused on decentralized compute. And the idea there is similar to the way that Filecoin has created a decentralized alternative to Amazon Web Services. You have the ability to really disrupt the way that AI currently works, where just the computing power, the sheer computing power is so enormously expensive that really only a couple of companies, a couple of major, massive companies that will remain unnamed, can afford it, right? So the idea with decentralized compute is to do the exact same thing that we did with Filecoin with storage, with compute, and really make it possible to put the power of AI into the hands of everyone, so that we don't replicate with AI what we've already done with big tech, where we can actually have more than just a few players who we live our lives through.
Absolutely, and I love that you took that perspective on this topic, just because when we hear about artificial intelligence, we are on two different extremes. We're either, hell yeah, artificial intelligence is awesome, but then on the other side, we're just like, oh, well, doom and gloom, it's not gonna be that great. But what you're saying is that there is so many ways to sort of reconfigure how we think about technology to really be that constellation that is so interconnected and can really volley off of each other and have the impact that we ultimately want to see flourish, right? So on that same vein, you have a tremendous civil liberties background, right? Would love for you to talk a little bit about, what are some of those civil liberty issues that we should be paying attention to, especially given each of the diversity of, tools and ways in which we navigate technology? What do we have to be privy to?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think this is a really interesting moment for civil liberties in a variety of ways. I think in the sort of cryptocurrency, decentralized web space, I think we are seeing a moment where there are a lot of really important battles being fought right now in the courts and elsewhere in the halls of Congress and other around the world. A lot of really important battles being fought over whether things like First Amendment protections, whether privacy extends to the financial realm. So I think that's one area that's really, really important. It's a really important moment for civil liberties. I also, as a civil liberties lawyer, am always sort of struck by the reaction that's to AI at the moment, right? Mm-hmm. Like I see a lot of people, often the response to AI, sort of the idea that we should treat it like a weapon, reminds me a lot of sort of the treatment of encryption, right? The initial treatment of encryption and another really important and powerful technology. The idea that we would treat that like a weapon is pretty, it really harkens back to civil liberties battles of the past. I also think that there is this huge reaction to AI, and I really worry about the way that that could have effects on the precedents that we have fought so hard in the civil liberties community to protect. So for example, it is very critical for things like Google or DuckDuckGo or its decentralized alternatives that machines are able to go out into the world and learn from data that is out there in the world. That learning, looking at things and learning from it, and this is just one example, is not copyright infringement, but rather is fair use. That's critical. And yet, at this moment in time with AI, we have this huge backlash where I think for a lot of people, the initial reaction is, no, machines shouldn't be able to go and look at things and learn from them. That shouldn't be fair use. And so I worry a lot about the important precedents that have been set that protect technology. And I worry a lot that the backlash against AI will really mean, first of all, a pushback of those important precedents. And second of all, will mean that AI can't actually meet its potential, the positive potential that it has, right? That there's actually a lot of good that comes from AI and other machines being able to go out and into the world and learn from things. So definitely an interesting moment for civil liberties lawyers.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And on that same topic, I would love to hear from you on, you spoke a little bit on some of the ways in which you are worried about some of the risks of artificial intelligence. You spoke a little bit about the impact use cases that you're seeing, but can you just unpack a little bit more some of those use cases that you're seeing in blockchain, especially as it connects to AI or other technologies? You mentioned, we were chatting back there about this project that I just learned about with Filecoin and space. Oh, tell me more. What's going on there? You just threw this at me. We want to know. But that, and also just, how are you thinking about these different use cases? So, I get that question asked a lot. So you work in blockchain, what good is it?
Yeah.
So help us understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's fundamentally, I think, one of the things that the Blockchain Law Center for Social Good has been doing such amazing work around, which is really showcasing all of the fantastic use cases that all of you in the audience are really working on. I think people in the audience laughed when space was brought up because they know I love it so much.
I didn't know that.
like this is my favorite project that we work on.
Okay, I'm so glad we take time to talk about this. Okay,
yeah.
Gotta extend. Okay.
Right. So for the last over 3 years, Filecoin Foundation has been working with Lockheed Martin Space on putting IPFS in space, and we were very excited in January to announce that we actually successfully completed a demonstration mission in space that actually deployed IPFS in space. Thank you.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. It's so exciting. It's a long time coming. So the idea here with IPFS actually stands for the Interplanetary File System. Why is it called the Interplanetary File System? It's actually called that because from the beginning, it was actually envisioned as a technology that, among many other great things that we've talked about today, could actually enable better communications, long-distance communications in space. Why is it better? So I've talked a little bit about how IPFS works, right? Well, one thing that happens with IPFS is instead of imagine you're sort of out at the moon, right? And you're using today's kind of centralized internet model to get data. On Earth, it doesn't really matter that there's like a little bit of a delay when you're getting data from a particular server in a particular place. But when you're on the moon, there's going to be a multi-second delay. When you're on Mars or out there, there's going to be a multi-minute delay every time you need to go back and forth to a particular server in a particular place, right? So there's a lot of latency in the system. With IPFS, you're not looking for a particular location in a particular place and looking for data there. You're instead looking for a content ID and pulling that content ID from wherever's closest, which means, let's say you're on a lunar station and some other lunar station has that data. It'll pull it from there. Or if you already actually looked at this data earlier today, it'll pull it from your own machine. Or if there's a passing satellite that has the data, it'll pull it from there. So it decreases a lot of the latency. The second reason that it matters a lot is one of the major problems with storing data in space is there's actually a lot of radiation, which means files get corrupted. And that's one of the major problems. And so again, if you're looking for data in a particular location in a particular server, well, a lot of times that's going to be corrupted because that's how space works. And so if instead you can have 10 different copies and just look for a particular content ID, it'll just pull it from wherever it's not been corrupted yet. So it's another reason that it actually is a really great architecture for space communications. And the third is the thing that I keep touching on, which is this idea that you can cryptographically verify that data hasn't been tampered with. And in this particular context, you can cryptographically verify that satellite images have not been tampered with, right? You can actually take a satellite image in space, assign it a content ID in space, and then when people view it on Earth, they know with certainty that it was not tampered with. So that's also very powerful. And so for these three very important reasons, Lockheed Martin and worked with Filecoin Foundation to actually deploy IPFS in space, built an implementation of IPFS that is fully open source, that is now actually starting to be used more broadly, and we really think that it can be an architecture for sort of the future space economy.
Wow, that we're done here. No, I know we're at time, but I would be remiss if I did not mention this point. I know that there is an annual report coming out from Filecoin. Is that part going to be in there so we can read more? What else is going to be in there? Can you give us a little preview?
Yes, the annual report. And this is a thing that definitely I'm very excited about. Some of the people in the audience here have worked unbelievably hard on it. The annual report actually came out today. Today is the day, the big day. And not only can you read about that, but you can also read about the projects that almost everyone in this room is working on.
Excellent.
So we're so excited to have all of you featured. And again, I would also be remiss if I didn't say a huge thank you to everyone in this audience who's been doing such incredible hard work to really showcase how this technology can be used to further civil rights and civil liberties. So thank you.
Marta, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you all.